Welcome back to season 5 of Nothing Is Real. Before we kick off, we just want to say hello and remind you that there's lots of different things in the Nothing Is Real universe to enjoy. And we've got lots of things planned for season 5, haven't we, Stephen?
We have indeed. We'll be talking about some new albums that are coming out. We'll be talking about some old albums. We'll be spending a lot of time talking about lawsuits. It's always a good thing. Everybody likes a lawsuit.
We all love a good lawsuit. We're going to be talking about songs. We're going to be talking about places. We've got a good interview lined up for season 5 that we've just done with somebody who's very, very interesting. So that'll be coming out too. So we just want to get you all primed. But we also want to remind you about Acast Plus, which is our subscriber option, because even though this is season 5, there's kind of an interstitial season 4.5 that's been going on in the background. We've discussed George Harrison's Dark Horse. We've discussed the incredible story of the fake American Beatles. We've discussed Paul McCartney's infatuation with our fine feathered friends. Lots of good stuff going on in the Acast Plus Nothing Is Real universe, isn't there, Stephen? Lots
of good stuff. I thought the fake Beatles was probably one of my favourite episodes. That was the thing I knew nothing about, so there's a lot to discover there. And there's a bank building up of those episodes that you can access if you subscribe.
Yes, so that's all available on Acast Plus. You can find out about that on nothingisrealpod.com, and we also have all our usual social activity where thousands of people are congregating to discuss and hang out and chat about the Beatles. The Nothing Is Real Facebook group, which is a private group that you can search for, the Twitter group, which is at Beatles Pod. We've got William Hinson, who's running our fantastic Instagram. Thanks, William. All that stuff is located. You can look for it in the one place at nothingisrealpod.com. And there's also a bit of Nothing Is Real merch available on nothingisrealpod.com and for sale on Redbubble.
There is. And most excitingly, we might be putting up a second TikTok video.
We might do a second TikTok video if my kids convince me to do so. So yes, the Nothing Is Real universe is only getting bigger. We want to thank you for coming with us on this journey and for all the nice reviews that you leave and for subscribing on Acast Plus for all those extra bonus episodes and goodies. But for now, let's kick off Nothing Is Real, Season 5. Welcome to Nothing Is Real, a podcast about the Beatles. Everybody thinks they know the Beatles, but how much do we really know? My name's Jason Carty.
My name's Stephen Cockcroft.
And we're live on tape from Dublin and Belfast. Welcome back to Season 5. It's great to be here with another dozen episodes and a few extra bits and pieces that we'll be doing for the next couple of weeks. It's nice to be here, isn't it, Stephen?
It's nice to be anywhere. Isn't that what they say?
That's what they say. I set them up and you knock them out of the park. Anyway, here we go, folks, for Season 5. On November 22nd, 1968, just 6 years after Love Me Do was going up the charts, The Beatles by The Beatles hit the shops. 30 songs and 93 minutes long. It's the bloody Beatles' White Album. Shut up. How do you discuss a behemoth of a record like this? In the words of Desmond Tutu, there's only one way to eat an elephant, one bite at a time, and so we'll go with one side at a time, logically starting with side 2 of the White Album. That's pretty straightforward, isn't it, Stephen? There's no other way to discuss it.
Yeah. Not really. Not you've set it up that way.
Well, we should probably have a bit of a generic talk about the White Album generally, because we haven't touched upon it before on the podcast. And, you know, obviously everybody knows the White Album. It's a very, to put it mildly, unique album.
It is. Everybody knows the White Album, but how much do they really know?
Well, that's what I've been saying for years. But it's a classic Beatles dodge where everyone thought they'd go one way and they go another way.
Yes, it is. And it's everybody's favourite Beatles album, I think.
Okay. Well, is it yours?
Yes, definitely.
I often say Pepper's my favourite Beatles album, but I'm aware that that's there's an emotional connection for me with Pepper because it's, you know, it was a big entry point for me, Pepper. I think the White Album, when you come back to it, it's still, even though there's so much well-known stuff on it, it's still the lesser known. For an album that's so many copies, still has unknown corners, which is really weird.
I think that's what I like about it. It was the last Beatles album in the canon that I bought. Yeah. So I had all the other albums. I had the Red Album, the Blue Album, all those compilations, and then I saw a poster with all in Smith's record shop in Bangor, and with all of the Beatles albums on it. And down in the bottom there was just a little white square, just like a little blank square. Yeah. And I remember saying to the guy, you know, but what is that? And he went, oh, that's the White Album. And the only songs that I knew at that stage were the 3 or 4 that appear on the Blue Album.
Yeah.
So when it arrived and they didn't have it in stock, it was so expensive at £7.50 that they didn't carry it in stock. It was a special order. And so there were 25, 26 new Beatles songs that I'd never heard before.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And it does have some of the most well-known Beatles songs, like something like Obla Di Obla Da, and then some of the least well-known Beatles songs. I was in a similar position. I remember buying it as a kid for a car journey, and it was the first Beatles album I bought on CD. And I bought it for the copious amounts of music that you were going to get from its songs. I was like, What does Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey sound like? That just seems insane. And when the reissues came out, the things I found odd is that there's kind of a popular national recognition of the Pepper cover and the Abbey Road cover, but White Album is still kind of a bit of a mystery.
It is that blank cover. Just there's so much inside it. But can we just rewind slightly? You bought this as a child for a car journey.
When I say child, I was 14.
Right, you weren't driving the car. Your parents were driving the car.
My parents were driving the car, yeah. It wasn't some kind of Thelma and Louise childish escapade.
So they were probably fine listening to Back in the USSR and Obla Di Obla Da. How did they get on with Revolution 9?
No. I was sitting in the back with headphones. Let's be totally clear. At this point, I was in surly 14-year-old mode.
Thank heavens for that. Otherwise, they presumably would just have driven you, Revolution 9, they'd have just driven you straight to the psychiatrist.
I'm not sure what was being played in the car. It could have been Charlie Pride or something, I don't know. But it's just, no. This was my own little Beatle world. And
it's a perfect album for a surly 14-year-old in the back of a car.
It is. Double albums tend to work well for surly teenagers, you know? I'm thinking of The Wall. Yeah. But it's amazing in this day and age. Like that was like, I'm listening to that album for the first time. I remember hearing Blackbird for the first time, on that. I was like, how did I not? You think now, how would you get to 14 or 15 without somehow interacting with Blackbird? It's all over the place, but I hadn't heard tons of that stuff before. What I did know going into the album was some of the kind of evil connotations that had attached to it, and because the time I bought it was just after Helter Skelter had appeared on Rattle and Hum, and that's obviously the definitive version of it.
Well, obviously they reclaimed that song, I think.
That's exactly what they said, that U2 stole it. No, Charles Manson stole this from the Beatles, and I'm stealing it back. And I think the Beatles probably said, no, you can leave it with Charles. That's all right.
That's fine. That's fine. Bono, Charles Manson, U2 pop up regularly on this podcast. I do like U2. I find it fascinating. I don't think they can do a cover version. I think they can't cover anything. The only cover version, welcome to the U2 podcast, the only cover version that I like is Can't Help Falling in Love with You.
Yeah, I suppose that's reasonably nice.
Satellite of Love is okay.
Yeah, actually, okay. So I'll take back everything I said.
Thank you.
30 seconds ago.
I'm demolishing your
Satellite
arguments.
of Love is good. Let's get back to the matter in hand, which is the White Album. Now, it wasn't the first double album in rock and roll, because that tends to be an award picked up by Frank Zappa's Freak Out with the Mothers of Invention. Do you like Freak Out? No.
I can say definitively I don't like Freak Out. Zappa is... There's too much. I've tried. I have. That said, I maybe have I was going to say a dozen, maybe 8 or 9 Zappa albums. The usual contenders, Hot Rats, that kind of thing. But Roxy and Elsewhere, that's a good album. But it's just too much. I can't cope with the sheer volume of stuff there.
Yeah, and I think I do own a copy of Freak Out somewhere. I cannot say I've listened to it in the last 20 plus years. But the White Album comes out in November '68, and it's the end of this kind of, I always see it as this kind of 1966 to 68 delta, where there's the splitting of pop and rock, and, things get very serious in rock music, and you have the Rolling Stone-ification of stuff. And obviously 67 was the year of Sergeant Pepper. And in the wake of Sergeant Pepper, there's this whole, Sergeant Jollity and his ragtime, minstrel, whatever orchestra thing type stuff that they, wandering bandwagon medicine show kind of stuff that happens. And I'm thinking of early 68 kind of prog stuff, groups like Tomorrow and all that kind of thing. And if people were expecting Sergeant Pepper, the sequel, if you were following the news throughout 68, you'd be finding out that, that's not really what they had in mind.
No, I mean, they spent the beginning of '68, obviously in India, and they left Lady Madonna as their single as a stopgap while they were away, and that's a real change of pace. That's kind of back to their rock and roll roots. Although you have the Inner Light on the B side, but the earliest hint, I suppose, is maybe sort of in the middle of the year. Paul is starting to reference John Wesley Harding, and this is an album that would have come out just before they went to India. And if you think Dylan never really bought into that psychedelic stuff. It's but it's quite a leap from Blonde on Blonde to John Wesley Harding, and he's going to this stripped back sound. He's in the basement with the band around the same time, and John Wesley Harding seems to be a huge influence on them at the time.
Yeah, like Dylan is hugely prolific, and then he just disappears for 67. So he sits back, everybody does their Summer of Love multicolored thing, and then Dylan reappears. And so the White Album isn't the first out of the traps in this sort of grand reset of rock, but it's certainly keeping its eye on that kind of vibe. It
seems to be a move towards this authenticity. I know you don't like authenticity. We're moving towards the band, men in beards and dark brown suits. But
I think as we'll talk about it, that's what's fantastic about the White Album, because there is this big schism between, the Monkees versus the Velvet Underground, basically, is kind of what it's all about. Yeah. And, the Beatles with the White Album, they definitely, I think, managed to do both sides. That they say, look, here is an album that contains, Happiness is a Warm Gun and, Honey Pie and Your Blues and all of that kind of stuff. And everybody's on board, it seems.
Yes, I mean this is I've mentioned this before. My theory about the Beatles always had something for the kids, something for the grown-ups, something for the mums and dads, the grannies. Even Sgt. Pepper has When I'm 64. Yeah, and they're still. It's probably. Do they ever get away from that? I mean, it's maybe they're always, even up to Abbey Road, you've still got Maxwell Silverhammer and Octopus's Garden, so they're still doing that. They're still trying to hit all of those the demographics. I'm sure nobody used that word in 1968, but yes, it's extremely interesting, and that they don't sort of put all their eggs in one basket here. They don't suddenly decide we're going to go full out. Rock. It's not like the Stones, who suddenly, it's this kind of blues authenticity with Beggar's Banquet, or Cream sort of dabble in pop on their first album, and then they sort of move more into hard rock and blues. And the other thing about the White Album is, although we said, maybe did Zappa get there first, but it's more probably by accident than design. What the White Album does deliver is this notion of, well, here is the double album as, the meandering and the ephemeral stuff is part of the charm. The fact that it's super long and super involving means that we can put a little bit of out there stuff on. So Revolution 9 being case in point, that, that gets to be on an album like that, whereas you wouldn't want it taking up a half-hour single album. Exactly. And the thing to remember about Freak Out is it's 14 tracks, 15 tracks, something like that. Blonde on Blonde is sort of the same. You've got one side is 12-minute track. You've got 30 songs here. Yeah. And it is, it ticks every box in terms of style and sound. So yes, it's probably the first double album in the sense of, Exile on Main Street or Tusk, or those albums that follow this sort of sprawling, eclectic mess. Yeah. In one sense,
Yeah, you're talking to the Tusk fan club here. Tusk is...
I know that.
Don't summon the Tusk guy.
I didn't mention... What is it? What's that album, that double album, that ELO double album?
Oh, Out of the Blue.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's got a symphony on one side, Stephen.
Like I said,
So there's a couple of episodes that we've done already that kind of will feed into the whole vibe of 1968. There's our early 1968 episode where we look at the weeks before they went to India. And, as Stephen mentioned there, the stuff that they had done was to leave behind Lady Madonna and the Inner Light. And they also had Hey Bulldog in the Can and a version of Across the Universe. That was their recordings for 1968. to date. Then they go off to India and then they come back from India. And the legend is that they have tons of songs. And it's the Melody Maker at the end of April 1968 gives a hint that there's lots of music flying around, isn't it?
Yes, this is Tony Barrow gives an interview, and he's saying, John has 15 songs, Paul has the same, George has completed several, and Ringo has finished at least one. So this is the first hint that Ringo has written a song. At this stage, Tony Barrow is saying highly unlikely they'll all be recorded. Probably about half will be abandoned somewhere along the line. So it's sort of out there that they have this stockpile of songs. But I suppose, the public always thought they had a stockpile of songs. We know that isn't the case, but from the very earliest days, they were saying, Please Please Me comes out, and they're saying, we're sitting on 100 songs that we've written so far. So this maybe wasn't anything particularly new in terms of the public perception, but we know that all the songs they had, most of those songs, are going to end up on this album.
Yeah, and we know from the Esher demos that they go in right at the start. They record a ton of these songs. Not all of them appear on the album. Some of them appear on later records or disappear to get kicked down the line into the solo years. But they are going into the studio, and we don't really have a sense of how they decided the order in which they would record things. But they head off at the end of May, and by July, Paul is saying to the Melody Maker, as you say, he's referencing John Wesley Harding. Some of the songs will be simple, if they are phenomenal songs, if they will need production. John Wesley Harding, he said, is a back to basics, was simple, and it didn't have big productions. So they're obviously, Dylan's one of the few people they pay attention to, I think.
Yeah.
And then at what point is it officially announced that it's a double album?
But this comes in October, where Derek Taylor is saying, imagine a double Sgt. Pepper album all at once. The only difference being this is 1968 and not 1967. Keep in mind the different climate. Imagine the record to be that way. They're much more free these days. There's a lack of guile in their approach. So he's hinting it's a simple, straightforward songs, a lot of rock and roll. The Beatles are very aware of their roots. And he explicitly says the whole package will be distinguished by a marked absence of psychedelia. So now this is the month, sort of 4 or 5 weeks before the album is due to come out, but they're sort of letting people know this is going to be a change.
Yeah, I thought that's a really telling comment, a marked absence of psychedelia. Obviously by October, he knows it's a white cover. He knows what the kind of the style of this record is going to be. And, of course, in the interim, they've had, Hey Jude Revolution has come out in the summer as the preceding single. But it's, it must have been very exciting in October 68 to be hearing about what was coming down the tracks. The Old Chestnut, should it have been a single album?
Well...
No. Okay.
No, definitely not.
I'll just write that down.
Could be a triple album. That's another episode.
Exactly. I mean, could Red Rose Speedway be a single album? Of course not. So, Paul famously in the anthology says, it's the bloody Beatles White Album, shut up. And that's the general point of it. When you have a big, broad canvas like this, you can do whatever you want. You found a really interesting, before we look specifically at side 2, you found an interesting extract from the New Yorker.
Yes, because I'm that kind of guy that reads the New Yorker.
You're very well
read.
That's the word.
Thank you. The first 2 sides, they say, follows the William Blake template, providing literal songs of innocence. Take that, you too.
That's what I was thinking.
And they foreshadow the darkness to come. So they're I mean, one of the things you have to bear in mind is the attention. It's famously the sequencing of the White Album was the single longest Beatles session.
Yes, it's the only 24-hour Beatles session.
So there's a lot of thought goes into this. And what the New Yorker says is, like vaudeville acts, these vignettes shift in style and tonality, including a music hall sing-along about young lovers in a fantasy marketplace, an ode to the sheepdog, a sweet meditation on a blackbird with broken wings, but already blue notes intrude on the carnival images of American landscapes from Miami Beach to the black mining hills of South Dakota, juxtaposed with gun violence, Saturday matinee, cowboy Rocky Raccoon, and then followed by Piggies, a sardonic Orwellian portrait of a predatory capitalism, the adolescent lust of why don't we do it in the road, and finally Julia, John's wrenching, heartbroken apostrophe to his dead mother who took him to the seashore as a boy. So they are focusing on the fact that this album unfolds. And, so you've got the up-tempo side one that starts it, and then you kind of move through into side two, which are these songs of innocence, these, we've got animal songs there, we've got pastiche, we've got comedy songs. So side two, I think, is arguably the most interesting. I'm not saying it's the best side or it contains the best song, but it's the most interesting side, I think.
Yeah, there was no pre-release single. None of these songs were known. And, they sign off when they're discussing Julia in that review. It says, the song Julia closes the book on a collective childhood abandoned and lost. And you think, no, it actually kind of opens the door for John to go down that songwriting avenue very much. So let's have a little look at side two. Do you want some stats, Stephen? Come on, everyone loves stats.
Give us the stats, Jason.
Okay, the White Album sessions went from the end of May 1968 to October 1968. There were 35 songs recorded during that, and of course 30 of those 35 songs went on to the White Album. The songs that didn't go on there were obviously Hey Jude and the Revolution B-side, and then also Not Guilty, What's the New Mary Jane, and etc. So it was a pretty tight session. Side two, out of all the sides on the White Album, has more songs than any other side on the White Album, with 9. However, it is the shortest running time of any side on the White Album, running at about 22:41.
You're good. You're good.
With a breakdown of songs of 1 for George, 1 for Ringo, 5 for Paul, and 2 for John, which is quite interesting because you mightn't even notice that there's only 2 John songs on that side. But they are obviously Julia and I'm So Tired. If you were to look at the songs as they were recorded chronologically for side 2, do you want to hear that list?
We do.
It goes Don't Pass Me By, Blackbird, Rocky Raccoon, I Will, Piggies, Martha My Dear, I'm So Tired, Why Don't We Do It in the Road, and Julia. And 5 of the 9 songs featured on the Esher demos, which meant obviously that 4 of them did not. Interesting stats.
There you go. This is why we keep you around.
Thank you. Yes, I am the office boy. I will get some teas in a minute. Let's just get stuck in, shall we?
Yep.
Okay. So side 2, track 1. Oh man, is Martha My Dear. And can I just say, for years, I thought side 2 opened with Happiness is a Warm Gun, because I am a child of the CD era. And for some reason in my head, I thought that the obvious split between side 1 and side 2 should have been between While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and then side 2 should open with Happiness is a Warm Gun. You can see why I might think that.
Well, yes, While My Guitar, big, bombastic.
It has this big bombastic ending, and then side 2 would open with She's Not a Girl Who Misses Much. Ooh, exciting. And I'm embarrassed to say it's relatively recently, like maybe only about 5 or 6 years ago, that I got my first ever vinyl copy of the White Album. And I was like, that's a really dumb thing to have just assumed. I don't know why I assumed it. I just had.
Yes, I can see that.
Happiness would be a good side opener. But anyway, we're not here to discuss Happiness is a Warm Gun. We're here to discuss Martha My Dear, which in the non-Jason universe is the song that actually opens side 2 of the White Album. Martha My Dear, everyone knows what this is about, don't they?
It's about his little sheepdog.
Yeah.
Or big sheepdog.
Yes. So Paul had a sheepdog. Now, I've read things that say 65 and some things that say 66 when he got the dog. I think it might actually be 66, if you trust me. But he got it to go with his house in Cavendish Avenue, didn't he?
Yeah, that's it. His first pet. He'd never had a pet.
Oh, yeah, I suppose he didn't really. There's no pets growing up that we know of.
No.
Can I tell you my most depressing Beatles fact? Is that Martha the sheepdog would outlive John Lennon.
Really?
Yes. Martha the sheepdog didn't die till about 1981. And Paul kept puppies from Martha the sheepdog, so it's one of the offspring on the cover of Paul Is Live.
I know that. I knew that, but I hadn't realised that Martha lived until 1981.
That's grim, isn't it?
That is grim.
It gives you an idea just how quick that timeline was, you know? It's quite shocking. And Paul loved Martha. She appears in the Strawberry Fields Forever video.
Yes. Yes.
If you want to see her at the end of that.
Yes, he remarks that, John always found it odd that he had a dog, and said, I've never seen you act that way with animals, and he said, animals love you unconditionally.
Yeah.
I believe.
Well, it feeds into that thing of Paul's where, he does love animals. And I think it's why over the years he's plugged himself into his family so much because, if you're Paul McCartney and you're meeting somebody new, you don't know whether, are they my friend or are they just after me because I'm Paul McCartney. But if you've got pets, you've got kids, you can really plug into that world and forget about yourself,
So the obvious thing is to write a song about
yes.
sheepdog.
By the way, are you a dog person, Stephen?
No, no. nor cats, nor any. I'm not a pet. I'm not a pet person.
Okay. Well,
sorry.
So I'm a cat person. So you're John in this dynamic, and I'm Paul.
Yeah. Although John ended up with cats, I think.
Oh yeah.
But is it really about his sheepdog?
Well, the thing with Paul is he sort of writes these kind of supple songs, and he'll start off in one point and he'll just, follow a thread. And so, what we know is if I look at my list here, it is the 30th of the 35 songs recorded for the White Album. So it's recorded quite late. And the contemporaneous notebooks apparently say that there was 2 songs that he was writing, which was Martha, My Dear, and a song called Silly Girl.
Yes.
And you can see how, if he had a song called Silly Girl, that's obviously nothing to do with Martha. And he's just welded the 2 songs together, probably.
Yes, I mean, he says he writes this in October 68, but as you say, the 2 songs appear in his notebook. If you go to the anthology book, there's a little... I really don't like the layout of the anthology book.
It's hard to read.
It's really hard to read, but if you go to the chapter on 1968, you can see his notebook, and he's got various songs listed. So the assumption would have to be, as you say, that this is him sticking 2 bits of music together. He says, this was just a piano piece originally that he taught himself to play it, and he says it's kind of above his or beyond his capability at the time. He was trying to push himself, and he's just blocking out words. So I suppose Martha is just a name. It has Martha, My Dear has a kind of lyrical flow to it, and he just vamps from there. So it's one of these songs that's really it's not about anything in particular.
Yeah, and it is a hard song to play on the piano. Like if you think of Paul on the piano in 1968, Lady Madonna is not particularly straightforward to play. I've never tried to play Martha, My Dear. I have tried to play Lady Madonna, and it's just really hard to get the feel of it right. Martha, My Dear, there was a chap on YouTube or whatever, one of those TikTok, whatever the kids are watching these days, who did a performance of Martha, My Dear recently, and you're watching the keyboards play and you think, yeah, this is a difficult song to play, particularly for somebody who does not write music or read music.
Well, this is it. He's not trained. He doesn't write music. And he does specifically say he was pushing himself with this. Ian MacDonald in Revolution in the Head says that it refers back to Happiness is a Warm Gun with its kind of little sections and changing time signatures and things like that, and said they've been working very hard on that song, and then Paul comes up with this. This is the next one that they really start working on. That he posits that perhaps he was influenced by that. I've got to do something kind of tricksy and fun, and if that's the case, it's interesting to contrast the 2 songs. John goes for something like Happiness is a Warm Gun. Paul's idea of being kind of tricksy and complex and is a fun
yes,
tricksy and complex. It
was recorded in not Abbey Road but in Trident Studios over 2 nights, starting on the 4th of October 1968. So Paul recorded vocals, piano and drums first. And then there were session musicians who'd been primed from a demo. Is that right? George Martin had written to a demo.
That's it. Paul gave him a demo so that he could work up the
I haven't
score.
Heard that demo. Is that out there?
I haven't heard that demo.
Yeah, I haven't heard that demo either.
I have to say, I do like the score. I like the kind of brass band.
I think the score is really unusual and it's really distinctive. There's occasional, some people say that Abbey Road is kind of the sound of the 70s in advance. There are certain bits and pieces that pop up on the White Album, and the instrumental break in Martha My Dear with the hand claps and the horns, I think sounds very 70s. You know, it's not, you know, George Martin was brilliant and fantastic, but occasionally he would have sort of a romantic sound to his scores. Whereas this thing is very brassy, upbeat, dancey, and the unscored version is on the White Album box set, and it's not as much fun. No, by any stretch of the imagination, you know.
No, it's not. And although they're two very different songs, "Single Pigeon" from Red Rose Speedway is this. It reminds me of it's a much more understated brass arrangement, but the two songs I think go together. But yes, the unscored version is not as much fun.
And it just go to show that, you know, Paul and George Martin, we can kind of tell now, you know, after 50 years, they had a very specific working relationship where George Martin, and I don't mean this to sound inflammatory, but George Martin really took Paul seriously.
Yes.
And Paul knew what George was able to do. So the notion that Paul is slipping George Martin a demo to say, we're going to record this with the Beatles next week, sort out a score, and George Martin goes off and does it. I can't imagine any of the other Beatles working with George Martin in that kind of way.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think, you know, John in particular, I think to an extent probably resented George Martin by this stage, you know, that he's wanting to get back to more basic stuff, I suppose. But, you know, we've all been in that situation where, you know, you're learning something or you're trying to do something new and you've got a teacher and and you kind of feel resentful that this person knows more about the subject than you do, even though they're the person who's sort of teaching you how to do something. And I think there is that sound of underlying resentment, and I suspect George had that as well, because naturally enough, George Martin has admitted this, he was giving the bulk of his attention to John and Paul. So Paul, I think, was much more open to learning. Yes. Lennon, I think, just doesn't have the patience for that.
Now, there is, as I said, there is this overdub with the session musicians. There is the Beatles White Album box set is the gift that keeps on giving. It is a fantastic box set. And there is I was going through it in advance of today, there is a picture of the overdub session with Paul and George smiling in front of the session musicians, which is labeled as the Martha My Dear session. So we got to assume that, you know, certainly Paul, George and Ringo are there for the recording. Is John there?
John doesn't seem to have been there, and you know, supposedly this track is played by Paul just with the session musicians, doesn't feature anybody else. But as you say, George is there, Ringo is there. There's definitely an electric guitar there. There's a little bit in the Beatles book monthly that Mal Evans, you know, his sort of diary thing, he says Ringo bashed a hole in his brand new bass drum skin the night we started this track. So perhaps he was just frustrated that he wasn't being allowed to play, that he kicked out. But so it's odd. There are sort of competing stories there as to who played what.
I will refer to the White Album box set from time to time. So the book says Paul, George and Ringo are on this one. Yeah. Which is fair enough.
It would make sense. I mean, why would they be there if they weren't required? And if they were there, why would they not be used? You know.
But as we'll discuss, there's various permutations of how many Beatles are on each given track as we go across. You know, it's not clear cut that all four Beatles are present for all four songs. Even after it's recorded, it pops up in January '69.
Yes, Paul is playing this on January the 9th and the 14th, and then again in Apple Studios on January the 25th. Just sort of tinkering around with it. So again, you get the sense from those little clips that he's, you know, it's a tricksy piano piece. So he's he's warming up or just showing off.
Well, he would
one or the other,
or both. He would do that thing and Let It Be, where he just wander in the morning and just play the piano to himself for a while, and. You sometimes tend to forget in the sort of the Beatles narrative, you kind of get into very much regimented years, and you do forget that the month in January '69, when they're doing all the Let It Be stuff, is just 6 weeks after the album comes out. These songs are still fresh. So Martha My Dear is recorded in October '68. So it's, you know, November, December, January, 3 months, not even 3 months later, about 10 weeks later, they're doing the Let It Be sessions. So this isn't like some reaching back into the past to play a classic in January
No, they're not.
'69.
They're not playing. It's not "Love Me Do," or it's. And I mean, it's essentially a continuation of the session. They just keep working all through.
It is. It always struck me as funny though, because they got so wrapped up in this notion of going back to basics in January '69 that they didn't realize, as we've kind of discussed earlier, that the White Album was them going back to basics. That was it.
Yeah. I think there are performances on the White Album which are band performances, your blues and things like that. And I suppose that's what maybe inspired Paul to think in particular, we can do these live. We're now at a stage, we've moved away from Revolver, Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, the orchestras, the studio trickery, we're now back, and we recorded some of the basic stuff on the White Album live, so we can do it live. But he's never, I think, played Martha My Dear live.
Yeah, a sound check apparently in Tokyo got a little bit of a bit of a play apparently.
You'd be pleased if he suddenly started to play Martha My Dear.
Well, the last time we saw Paul at the end of 2018, it was amusing that the White Album is such a reservoir for Paul's live set. So he took 5 songs from the White Album at that gig. He played back in the USSR, Birthday, Blackbird, Obladi Obladan, Helter Skelter. And if you think about it, here is a guy who has so many good songs. He's going to do 5 album tracks from an album that's 50 years old. Everyone's going to go nuts. Imagine if somebody said, listen, I'm going to do nothing but album tracks tonight, and you're pulling out songs like, Birthday and Helter Skelter and all the rest.
It's interesting. Do people know those songs? Do Paul fans know those songs from the White Album or from Paul's versions of those? Because he's committed. He's released versions of these.
Yes.
Some of those songs. Obviously not Martha My Dear, but he's. Are the people who are there and responding to that? Are they responding to those songs because they know his version of these songs rather than the Beatles' version?
Obladi Obladan back in the USSR are red and blue album favorites, so they're going to be played anywhere. I kind of have come to the thought in the last few years that he could basically play any Beatles song at this stage in concert. And as we said we were chatting to Luke Haynes, if he broke out Maxwell's Silver Hammer, whatever your opinion is of that song, if he played that live, people would be like, ha, fantastic. Yes. And they would just go with the flow. True. So I think he could basically crack at any Beatles song. What kind of surprised me as a young Beatles fan when he was doing the tour for Flowers in the Dirt, the New World Tour, and Trip in the Life Fantastic and all that. What surprised me was how much of Abbey Road he did, because I didn't think that was, maybe at that point in time, in the late 80s, quite the big
touchstone
deal. Yeah, I didn't think that was, and I think he has made that the touchstone for his gigs. Maybe that's obvious in retrospect. Maybe somebody who was around there in 1989 might want to criticize me, but it wouldn't have been... although that kind of 89 tour was a big revival for his Beatles tracks, that particular ending his gigs with the Abbey Road suite was very much a kind of a hands up. I've got nothing better than this to finish my gigs with. In a way,
it is a little bit. It is a little bit, I suppose. Yeah.
But anyway, that's Martha My Dear. We can tick that one off the list, can we?
And what a great start to side 2.
What a great start to side 2. And we thought we wouldn't be able to stretch this out, and here we are. Martha, there's so much to talk about.
End of part 1. Intermission. End of intermission. Part 2.
Let's go to the second track on side 2, so 2-2, which is I'm So Tired. This is a song that did have an Esher demo done for it, and it is the song that was recorded. I've got to find my recording order here. It was recorded 32nd out of the 35 songs for the White Album. So it's recorded near the end.
Keep the best to last. That's
pretty much, and it's so John.
This is arguably his best song.
Okay, argue it then.
I mean, if you wanted, we talk about Plastic Ono Band, and we giving an insight into John's psyche and primal screaming and all the rest of it. But if you had to pick one song that was just quintessentially him, this is it. He just likes lying in bed.
He does like lying in bed, more so than maybe any of the other Beatles.
And it is a kind of, it capture, you do get a sense that it's absolutely about him.
Yes.
That it's not like Martha, My Dear. It's not about a sheepdog or some imaginary girl or something. This is absolutely about John. And there's a sort of a path from, I suppose, In My Life is the first explicit one, but obviously there's autobiographical writing earlier than that. But you do just get a sense that this is about him. And in one sense, it's a song about nothing, about just insomnia. But in another sense, it's a song about everything. You know, it's kind of about the human condition. It's about kind of how your mind works, what it's like to be a sort of artist, what it's like to be a human being, you know.
Well, the other episode that we've done in the past that kind of feeds into what we're talking about today is our episodes about the song Revolution. And there's something happening with John when he comes back from India. Well, one is he is hooking up with Yoko, and he is sets the process in place to divorce Cynthia Lennon. But there is also the more personal aspect of his songwriting is coming out. And a song like I'm So Tired, you know, John, when he writes about himself, you know, it's him when it's at its best, he's managing to write about himself, but also we can all imagine it's about ourselves.
Yes.
So, you know, if he's doing a song, I don't know, like Do the Oz, you're like, well, whatever. Okay. But if you're singing a song like I'm So Tired, you think, well, I've been tired.
Yes. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. He can take the personal and make it universal. And, you know, we can argue about in future episodes about when perhaps that gift started to slip away, you know, where you become, the solipsism starts to take over, and it no longer kind of resonates beyond yourself, your wife, and your circle of friends.
Well, what I would add to, you know, you saying this is, you know, quintessentially John, or possibly the best song, is I would say that this song is perhaps the best example of why the Beatles were the best band to back John Lennon. Because they are taking this song, you know, which is basically about being tired and being insomniac, and they are suffusing it with a very specific performance that gets across this sort of drowsiness, this middle of the night discombobulation. You know, it gets, you know, there's bits of the song where he gets a bit angry, you know, I give you everything I've got for a peace of mind. And, you know, the band are matching him for that sound. If you take John Edwin and listen to what the band are bringing to a track like that versus, say, some 70s session musicians, it is really great.
There's a sort of empathy. Yes, there's an empathy there in the play, and what I'd say is that, you know, you couldn't pinpoint anybody that's letting a side down, but Ringo, I think, is just amazing on this track. It's an odd drum part, but it's I also say about, you know, it's Paul's bass or Ringo's drums, they serve the song. But this is what Ringo is doing here, and it's a song, I suppose. It's a song about Yoko.
Well, possibly, yeah. It's there's a lot going on, so let's break it down a tiny bit. You know, we have, as we said, John always liked his bed, and the more you think about it, you know, there's not just the bed-ins. There's loads of footage of him in bed in Titmus Park. There's loads of photos of him in bed in the Dakota. Bed was where he got lots of stuff done.
Yes. If you what I recommend just on the White Album generally is the David Quantick book, Revolution: The Making of the Beatles White Album. I do not always agree with David Quantick's opinions in this book, but it's a very well written book, and it's very funny, it's very droll. And one of my favorite sentences, he says, like many artistic people who rise late, work late, and value their sleep perhaps a little too much, John was mad for his bed. And I think you know, that's it, you know, the bed-ins and everything. It's I'm only sleeping, you know. It's
we have many casual pictures of Paul, you know, on his farm grappling with his flock, but we don't really have any pictures of him. No. Even if it's pictures of him relaxing, he's usually diving into a pool, or you know on top of a horse. I'm sure he likes a good night's sleep as much as the rest of us, but you know, yes. So the song, this is a song that came from India. And when John was writing in India, he had a copybook. They all had copybooks in India. And John, and you can see this in the White Album box set when you're looking at the scans of the lyrics, John would write a number for each song that he was writing. And so this was song 12, apparently. Song
12. So so he's 12 songs written in India before he gets to this one.
Yeah, so
that would make sense, because he in 1980 he says, I was in India, I couldn't sleep, I'm meditating all day, couldn't sleep at night. That's the story. One of my favorite tracks. I just like the sound of it. I sing it well. But so he's a little bit sort of casual about what he's talking about in this song. But as you say, he'd already begun his relationship with Yoko at some intellectual level, shall we say, at this stage.
Before he goes to India, yes. She's writing to him in India.
And she's sending him little cards but clearly I think he seems to be writing this to Yoko, that my mind is set on you. I wonder, should I call you, but I know what you would do. Yeah, that seems to be about another woman, you think?
Well, it's to do with tiredness, but it's also to do with preoccupation. I don't want to say obsession, but just kind of, it's to do with mental churn, basically.
Yes.
And as you pointed out, there's one line which might be able to tell us exactly when he wrote the song.
Yes. He said, he sings, it's 3 weeks, I'm going insane. So 3 weeks into his stay in India would be March the 9th. 1968. So there you go.
3 weeks is a reasonable length of time to get to your 12th song if you weren't doing anything else.
If you were John Lennon, I think so. So at this stage, he'd have had 3 weeks of meditating, 3 weeks of isolation, 3 weeks of thinking about Yoko, 3 weeks of getting her postcards, running down to the post box or wherever the postcards were arriving to in India. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, that does all add up. It does appear on the Esher demos, and it has this funny little kind of extra bit in the Esher demos, which is when I hold you in your arm, when you show each one of your charms, I wonder, should I go to the funny farm, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If you listen to that demo, if you listen to that little section, that actually sounds like that's the bit that gets reworked for Happiness is a Warm Gun.
I hold you in my arm. Yeah.
And feel your finger on my trigger. So that's kind of interesting how nothing is wasted. They'll turn this bit into a bit of soup, and this bit goes into a pie. It's very post-war. And it's, as we said, it's recorded late. Song 32 of 35, pretty much begun and completed with all four of them. 8th of October 1968, with a long session alongside Bungalow Bill.
Yeah. So this is a band track. They're playing it live, and John is singing on every take, and there's some overdubs later, extra vocals, drums, guitar, but this is a live band track.
Yeah, and feeding into that notion of solo Lennon, there are bits on the album, and we said this in the Revolution episode, where you hear the voice of the Plastic Ono Band Lennon appearing, and you hear it here, this kind of screaming,
yes, absolutely,
melodic screaming kind of vocal, which is new for him, really.
It is. I think this is absolutely this is where that solo Lennon voice comes in.
Now, I was listening to the song yesterday, Stephen, and I got really worried because I thought, Jesus, is Paul dead? I thought that's kind of what I heard.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. Yeah, he just says Paul is dead, man.
I was really freaked out.
Miss him. And you were convinced. I
was rocking in a corner. I didn't know what to do. I was just somebody had to talk me out of it.
So what is he mumbling about?
He says, will I try and do it on the microphone here? Miss, how about another one? So, Monsieur, how about another one? Okay. Fair enough.
Or miss him. But yeah, this became a key track, I suppose, or key clue in the Paul is dead. If you play it backwards, he says, Stig has been dead for ages, honestly.
It does also reappear in Twickenham.
Everything reappears in Twickenham.
In January 69. And we have versions of Anthology. We have different versions of Anthology 3, which is one of these Frankenstein mixes. And then we have two other versions or we have a Take 7, Take 14 on the White Album box set. That Take 14 on the White Album box set is fantastic.
It is very good. It's one of those things that you think, why why didn't that come out on anthology? Why did they feel the need to kind of...
It's one of the few alternate versions where you're thinking, actually, that would do. You know,
Yes.
it's got different harmonies. It's got a different kind of melodic-y, keyboardy, guitar-y thing in the background.
Yeah.
It would have done. And the other thing I would say is the 5-1 mix is fantastic, particularly if you want to dig out Ringo's drums.
The 5-1 mix on is of this whole album is
very good,
insanely good.
It is.
I recommend listening to Revolution 9 in particular in the dark in a 5.1 remix. They just go nuts. Have you heard that version from Twickenham with Paul singing the song?
I can't say I have. No,
I'll see if I can find a copy of that on YouTube and put it up. But it's a full take, and he's basically trying to sound like John, right down to the miss him at the end, you know. So it's
take that out. Yeah, I'd love to hear that. So lots of different versions. You know, the thing I noticed on the 5-1 when I was listening is Ringo's drums have this kind of train thing where he goes, you know, I'm putting you on, this kind of chugga thing. Yeah. It's just fantastic. So even and it's not even his only song about being tired, or we also have I'm Only Sleeping as well. You know, but it is a fantastic song, and one of the tracks that features all 4 Beatles.
Yes.
Should I tick that off the list? Should we go on to
tick that off the list? Tick that off the list.
This is literally a tick box exercise. Okay, track 3, side 2 is Blackbird, a song people might know.
Yes, people might know because we talked about this on our bonus Paul's Birds episode. So there's probably not much more to say. So
there's not much more to say, folks.
So we can just go on to Piggies.
Let's not. Let's just stick on Blackbird for a sec, because we really focused on solo Paul Birds when we were talking about that. So Blackbird is the 4th of the 35 songs to be recorded for the White Album. So it was recorded quite early on. It's the first Paul song to get recorded for the White Album, and it does have an e-shirt demo, and it's one of those songs that Paul kind of keeps telling us about over the years. He has told us how he's written it, why he's written it, what's it written about, what's it for, and
he loves this song.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? And listen, why shouldn't he? You know, like if you'd created something like this, you'd be telling everyone about it all the bloody time.
I'd never shut up about it if I'd written this song. If I'd written a line in this song, I'd never shut up about it.
Now, do we summon for the first time in this episode Donovan?
We do. We do. We do.
Where are you, Donovan?
The rehabilitation of Donovan starts here.
I don't have a problem with that.
We've been slightly unkind. People have been pointing out that we've been slightly unkind to Donovan over the years, but we've just been reporting what Donovan says.
Again, if I had lived Donovan's life, I wouldn't stop talking about it either. You know,
no,
if I'd been hanging out with the Beatles, you know.
Exactly, but I think you know we can definitively say that this is the point. This is the point in India in particular is where Donovan's influence really it comes into play, and where you know the evidence is on tape.
And I think, you know, because the legend is that Donovan, you know, was had a folk styling to his guitar playing. He would do finger picking, and in India he teaches it to John, and he's also showing it to Paul. And to my mind, it affects John and Paul slightly differently, because Paul has a couple of little classical things that he does on a guitar anyway.
Yes.
And so I would imagine it's kind of the combination of Paul's picking out little classical things that he has said in interviews that he did, you know, way back in Cavern days for a laugh, you know, where you play bits of Bach on the guitar with George.
That's it. Yeah.
It kind of gets put into the stew with the Donovan finger picking, and you get a thing like Blackbird.
Yes, I mean, there's I think again in the David Quantick book he recounts the fact that, you know, they only had acoustic guitars with them, and Donovan is able to play, you know, any of his repertoire in this kind of finger picking style. And he said the Beatles are reduced to playing When the Saints Come Marching In and Happy Birthday and Jingle Bells and things like that, because they're just kind of blocking out chords and they don't really have that facility to play those things. And so then they're suddenly keen to learn.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of, you imagine it's kind of kumbaya campfire stuff. And this is a much more sophisticated thing. And, you know, for all that the Beatles absorbed whether it's Bach or whether it's early rock and roll or whether it's show tunes, the one area that they don't seem to have been influenced by at all is folk music.
Do you mean kind of that very English type of folk music?
Yeah, but it's kind of finger in the ear, itchy sweater folk music.
Hey Nonny kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Have we lost any listeners by saying that?
But the Donovan style of folk, like every guitar player seems to have grown up learning how to play Angie.
Yeah.
Not the Stone song, obviously, but that whole kind of Martin Carthy style of thing, that troubadour style. You've got Paul Simon and in the folk clubs, and that's just completely alien, I think. They're not influenced by that.
When they're getting their rock and roll rocks off in the 50s, it's all very tribal. I think folk music would have been seen by Lennon as soft, that kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Now, although we're talking about India, it seems that this song was written just after Paul comes back from India, or it's finished after he comes back from India.
Yeah. So as you say, he seems to have this Bach piece in mind, and he just works this out, and he talks about suddenly taking it to a different level, and but this seems to have been written in Scotland, in the farm on Scotland, and again, this is the beginning of his relationship with Linda at this time.
There's an odd story in Shout.
Oh, terrible book. Have I mentioned it's a terrible book?
Yes. But this story is strange. What's the story?
Yeah, this is Margot Stevens, who's one of the Apple Scruffs, and she tells a story about waiting outside the gates of Cavendish Avenue, and said they felt something was going to happen because Paul arrives with Linda and he doesn't take his little Mini into the house. He parks on the street and walks past them, which is unusual. And then they went inside and said they stand there watching kind of lights going off and on. And she says the light went on in the mad room at the top of the house where he kept all his music stuff and his toys. He opened the window, called out to us, saying, "Are you still down there?" And then sat on the windowsill and sang Blackbird as they stood in the dark outside the gate.
Now, I think that is a psychopathic thing to do.
What of Margot to be standing outside?
No, like of Paul. Do you not think that's just really strange to sort of say?
That's I can't believe I'm defending Paul to you. This is a lovely thing to do.
Yeah, but it's a curious that he sees his life as performance. That he is squiring a lady who goes on to be his wife and the mother of his children, and he's like, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to sing to my fans downstairs. That he's still incorporating them into something that, if personal. The story is to be true, it's the ultimate impersonal. And also that he's like, and I've got a good song to do it with as well.
Well, I suppose, I mean, if you look at it, I suppose what he's doing is he's letting them know that this is his new girlfriend. Jane is gone.
Yeah, because that's how you do it. You go onto the roof of your mansion and you sing a song about Avery. I don't know.
Avian friends. No, what I mean is he doesn't just simply drive past them and into the drive and close the gate.
Yeah.
He walks Linda past them. So he's kind of letting them know, this is the new woman in my life. He's kind of being very public about it. There's that aspect of it. And then there's just this kind of nice playing a song for the fans.
Fair enough. And it's a very appropriate song because
you would have been outside that house.
Oh, listen, I would have been an Apple Scruff if I'd been born on a different timeline. But it's as I was saying, it's a nice song to sing because if I check notes, read it, it's a romantic song about, it's about civil rights.
Yes.
And now this, I think I first remember Paul talking about this in the Many Years From Now book from the late 90s.
That's where I first heard it, yeah.
Where he says, and this is quoting Paul, "I had in mind a black woman rather than a bird. These were the days of the civil rights movement." So he was trying to write, "Keep your faith, there is hope." And the bird becomes symbolic so you could apply it to your particular problem. And I had thought for years this was revisionism, but it's not revisionism.
No, it really isn't. I think that's the first time I heard it, and you know, we've heard him say this in concert as well.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
but yes, if you go back to a studio tape in 1969, which I think is the Mary Hopkins sessions, and Donovan is there, and he talks about seeing these images sort of in Little Rock, and so clearly it was an inspiration.
Yeah.
But he does say, you know, as is often the case with my things, a veiling took place. So rather than say black woman living in Little Rock and be very specific, she became a bird, became symbolic. So you could apply it to your particular problem.
Yeah.
And it is this thing that we talked about with John Lennon, where you write something which is from a personal experience or something that you've seen, but in a way that, you know, it has a universal appeal. And people can listen to that song. You know, you and I have seen Paul in concert where he plays this, and it does evoke a reaction.
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah.
the crowd do respond to it, and it's a kind of, yeah, you know, it's a kind of soothing thing. It's a comforting thing. It's not as explicit as something as like Let It Be, but there is just a sense of kind of optimism or hope or comfort about it, and you don't need to look at the lyrics and deconstruct the lyrics.
No.
It's a metaphor from start to finish, or else it's not. You know, it can be one or other or both.
Well, it is a song that he's obviously fond of, because it's one of the first Beatles songs that gets rehabilitated when he's wings over Americaing and wings overing the world in the mid-70s. So it gets played then. And it was the first Paul song recorded for the album. And it's notable that he's recording it on his own, because it is just him.
Yes, it is. He's taping this in Studio 2 while John is next door working on Revolution 9. There's a contrast for you, you know?
Yeah, no, very different. And Paul records 32 takes, only which 11 are complete. And there is a bootleg out there, which I'm very fond of him going through all the different iterations and, you know, putting one verse here and one line here and the other there. So even though it sounds quite complete on the Esher demo, it's still a very malleable song until he nails the kind of the final form and the way the song ends, and he comes back into the riff as well. But he's figuring out all that kind of flow.
Yeah, and there are photographs of that session. There's photographs of him sitting there and he got yellow shoes and he's sitting on the red chair. And when we were in Abbey Road, it was the red chair that kind of stuck in my mind. And I remember Mark Lewis, when he was on, saying he was given one of those red chairs. I'd like a red chair.
I wouldn't mind a red chair. It's a wonder the Abbey Road store hasn't found reproduction red chairs. We also have footage of Blackbird, don't forget. So it's one of the few White Album tracks for which we have footage of the recording. And this kind of answers the question, if you watch the footage, of is it a metronome making that ticking noise or not? It seems to be his yellow cloggy shoes.
Yes. You know, Mark Lewison saying it's a metronome, but Jeff Emmerich, for whom I have no time, except
you are so particular.
Except here, he recalls in his book very specifically capturing the sound on a microphone beside his shoes. But I'm prepared to take that because we have independent verification of that.
We do. We have photographic verification with synced audio to actually see Paul tapping his feet, making that tapping noise. But it goes to show how rock solid his rhythm is, because it could be a metronome, you know. Yeah. And even though he's the only person on it, there's also some sound effects.
Yes. So it's a Blackbird. Stuart Eltham was the engineer at the time. He in Mark Lewison's recording sessions book says he taped the sound of a Blackbird on one of EMI's first portable tape recorders in his back garden in 1965 or so. Two recordings, one of the birds singing, the other making an alarm sound when he startled it. So.
Yeah, Paul did say, somebody said it might be a thrush, but I think it's a Blackbird when he was being interviewed in 1968. Well, do you know what I've done, Stephen? I have taken the recording of Blackbird from the White Album, and I've run it through BirdNet, which is an app you can buy. And you can, if you want to record a bird in your garden, it'll tell you what kind of bird it is. So
I would expect nothing less.
So this is the level of detail we will go into. So I did put in some different sections of Blackbird into this app of the song, and it told me specifically, are you ready for this? What type of bird is making that noise? It is, and I'm not making this up, Turdus merula is the name. Turdus merula, which is the Latin name for the Eurasian blackbird. So I can confirm it is a blackbird.
Very good.
Thank you very much. My work is done.
Your work is done. Why did you buy this app? I see there's an Egyptian vulture has just appeared in Ireland, so don't delete that app. Yeah, so don't.
Oh my gosh.
It's the end times.
There's
don't
well, yes.
don't delete that app. You may need it.
It's just, you know, there's an app for everything. Like, I wonder what bird that is, and then instead of having to use your brain, you can just go ask your phone. So yeah, BirdNet, folks. Download it wherever you get your apps. It's a pity, you know, considering there's so many different variations and versions, that we don't get much of a difference between Anthology 3 and the White Album box. You know, that's a pretty standard, just alternate take, really.
This is one of these songs that I think, you know, I'd quite like to have 3 or 4 versions played, so that you could kind of do a comparison. You could see how the thing develops. Do you remember? But it's very difficult to play. Do you remember Paul in concert calls out to people and says, "Hands up, who has ever played this?" And everybody goes, "Yay!" And he says, "But none of you ever got it right, because I'm the only person that can play this right."
He is totally right. A friend of mine is able to play it, and even still, it's really hard, and it's really it's extraordinarily difficult to play. And there's a very funny clip of Fred Armisen many years ago on Jimmy Fallon when he was hosting Late Night, and he's like, "I'm going to sing a song for you all, and it's Blackbird by Paul McCartney." And the ones go, "Yay!" And he plays it, and in Les Dawson style, he plays it completely wrong, but he's got a very serious face, as if, you know, this is the best version you've ever heard. And it's that Les Dawson thing where it's just totally off and not quite, and it's very, very funny.
But the thing is, Paul makes it. I know he's been playing this for 50 years, and he's the man that wrote it, but he does just make it look so effortless.
But it goes into the canon with Lady Madonna and Martha My Dear as these sort of very finicky little songs that have these little specific bits in them that are strange. Yeah, I couldn't make I think I'd bite my nails too much to be able to play Blackbird, to be honest. You know, I couldn't pick the strings. It's a song, as we said, that he loves, that he comes back to, and it's also the name of his poetry anthology.
Yes. Have you got that book?
No.
No, you don't. Oh,
I don't. Well, you know, I these things are nice things, but am I really going to take them off the shelf and look at them?
Are you buying the new 2-volume set?
I do not have an order in for that. I mean, again, it's just, you know, life.
Space.
It's space, money, time. You know, you buy these things thinking you're buying the time to enjoy them. And, you know, if you're putting something like that on your shelves, you want to use it, don't you? I don't know, would I use it? Particularly when I can just go and look at your copy for 20 minutes and go, "Oh, that's interesting."
I suppose that's true. I suppose that's true. I was... In my notes, I had put the very over-the-top publisher's description, but I'm not going to read that out.
Oh, really? Which? Of Paul's Blackbird singing book?
It really over-eggs the pudding.
Let's have a look now. Oh, let's to actually read Paul's poems, whether exuberant love ballads or poignant messages of deepest grief, and they're obviously including spies like us in that, is to revel in the sheer power of language and to appreciate the electrifying confluence of dream and song. Indeed, his words are as pure and magical as we remember them. Oh my gosh, it just goes on and on and on, doesn't it?
The poems here demonstrate against an acknowledgement of the solitariness of existence, an irrepressible belief in the power of words and music to take a sad song and make it better.
Wow.
It includes freedom.
Freedom is in the book?
Yes.
Whoa. Right. To take a bad song. And anyway, Blackbird. Maybe you've heard of it, folks. Check it out if you haven't. It's a great song.
It's worth hearing.
Let's proceed with the animal theme that goes on in side 2 and talk about Piggies, which is the track that George has been given on side 2. It's whenever you look at the White Album, you can't just think George. You get one song on each side, just one, bang, 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 bang.
Yes,
that's it. There's no, there's no art to any of that.
But there's another 3 or 4 songs he wrote at the time. Sarmel Sea, Circles, Not Guilty, that don't make the cut.
Yeah, the only one that officially gets recorded for the album is Not Guilty, and we think that just gets the cull in October when they're doing the running order, because George is out of the country and they just take it off.
George isn't here, and they obviously realise, what? We have to give him 2 songs on one side. No, get rid of that.
This album doesn't have 5 sides.
Yes.
What's he thinking?
Know your
place, George.
Know your place, George. So instead we get Piggies.
Piggies, and
this must be your favourite song on the album.
Well, it's so subtle. I just can't figure out what he's getting at.
Yeah.
It's what I do think is funny about it is that it's obviously it's got this Orwellian Piggies societal type stuff going on, but you have to say it's a deft 2-minute something pop song. And very enjoyable. It is fantastically well produced. Particularly, it follows the thing that I've noticed in the reissues on the 5/1s is that George's songs get very good treatment in surround sound on all these reissues.
Yes.
Maybe because George and Danny is signing off on them, and maybe Paul is toning down some of the 5/1 stuff on his tracks. I don't know, but George and 5/1 in Beatlesland is great. What does amuse me is that this deft little 2.5-minute pop song got turned into an entire album by Pink Floyd. Just 9 years later,
There you go.
Roger Waters never one to take a point and keep making it non. And I do love Pink Floyd and all that kind of stuff. But this is the exact same as the album Animals by Pink Floyd.
Yeah,
isn't it?
But in 2 minutes.
Yeah, and it just sort of says what needs to be said. I mean, if you're to come down on what's bad about Piggies, it's obviously sour old George. The millionaire complaining about societal tropes and things. But it's a satire, isn't it?
It is. It's a satire, and it's been kicking around for years. He began writing it in 1966. Can you imagine this on Revolver?
Well, it goes to show that his head was, Revolver had Taxman, so it would seem to be paired with Taxman as a sort of, we kind of joke about George being sour, but it's a very interesting position that he's in to come from his background to suddenly be somebody of independent, significant wealth, and then to have to, as he saw it, deal with people who'd had this wealth for a long time who he kind of found objectionable. Is that a reasonable thing to say?
I think that's a fair comment. But at the same time, as you say, with Taxman, he resented anybody trying to take his wealth away. We're not redistributing the wealth through the tax system.
But he's also starting, apparently, Why My Guitar Gently Weeps, roughly? Or when does that come?
Yep.
That's when he visits his parents in 68, isn't it?
That's when he visits his parents. So he went back to his parents in 1968 and discovered in the attic of his parents' house the lyrics or the notes for this song, and he kind of starts to revisit it, and that's when he starts While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
And so, we talk about this inspiring Pink Floyd, but obviously it comes from George Orwell, his Animal Farm book. Yeah. And the Piggies are broken down into, little piggies, which are supposed to be the working class, and then upper class aristocratic bigger piggies. And as life gets harder for the little piggies, the bigger piggies keep, taking.
So he's condensed the entire book into a 2-minute pop song.
And thankfully, that song came out and all those problems were solved, and it's not an issue today.
So it just shows you the power of music.
The power of music, yes. With maybe nowadays you'd have a verse about Piggies going into space. A little bit of political commentary there, folks.
And the other thing is we have to give his mother, Louise, a credit.
She wrote a line.
George had written, in their lives there's something lacking, and she came up with the line, but they needs a damn good whacking.
And John also suggested a line, because the original lyric is, which you hear in the Usher demo, is clutching their forks and knives to cut their pork chops, which really doesn't scan. No. Which is clutching forks and knives to eat their bacon, which is a much better way of...
Either way, it's a pretty sick line.
Oh, it's pretty grim, yeah. But that's the point, is that it's a pig eat pig world, isn't that what we're being told?
It's a pig eat pig world, absolutely, absolutely.
And also, the other great thing about this track is it features the future producer of Back to the Egg, Chris Thomas,
and future Sex Pistols producer on harpsichord.
Yeah, I bet Glenn Matlock loved that. Chris Thomas, for It Is He. Suggests that a harpsichord gets played, and you think of Piggies, that's what you think of, really.
Yeah, so it's just like he says, you know, they're working in Studio 2. He wanders into Studio number 1, found a harpsichord, and was ready to wheel it back into number 2. And Ken Scott, the other engineer, was saying, no, it's all set up. It's all set up for a classical recording the next day. So they just shifted their session into number 1, and he played the harpsichord. And he has a cute little story where he says while he was playing this, George is sort of blocking out another song that he's working on, which is Something.
Yeah, and he sort of says, what do you think of this?
What do you think of this? And he goes, it's great. Can we do that one instead? He goes, no. Do you think it's good? No, let's do Piggies. And so, you know, Something is kicking around at this point as well.
And so is Let It Be.
Let It Be.
We've heard one of the Let It Be snippets on the White Album box. So these things are all percolating around.
Exactly. So they start recording 19th of September is the start date. Paul does an early pass at Let It Be. George has got Something kicking around. But it shows you kind of how they're sitting on 30 odd songs, and they're still tinkering with new stuff.
Well, it is the 26th of the 35 songs recorded in the White Album session, so it's recorded in the back end, as you say, on the 19th of September, and it is one of the tracks that features all 4 Beatles plus Chris Thomas plus some sound effects.
And what does John play on this? Nothing.
Well, he just does a vocal. He just does some harmonies and things, doesn't he?
Yeah, makes pig noises.
Well, listen.
So you know, it's John Lennon making pig noises.
Yeah, it's like...
Keep that tape.
As a side point, which we like to do, you know, there's a reissue coming out later this year of Rings Around the World, the Super Furry Animals record.
Yes.
And you know what Paul McCartney's contribution to that is?
Is he crunching vegetables on
crunching celery on a track called Receptacle for the Respectable. And there's a track listing on the reissue called, I think it's called Macaphile Celery Crunching or something like that. It seems that one of the tracks is just going to be Paul eating celery.
Excellent.
On its own. So I'm
throw nothing away.
Throw nothing away. We'll see. That's due out later in the year as we talk.
It's a very good album.
Yes.
Worth having, even without Paul's celery crunching. It's very good album.
It's very, very. It has a great Beatley vibes on it. Anyway, we digress. There is piggy noises from an old 78, which they're masking by having kind of their own snorty noises on top.
You imagine they were having a good time. So it was John assembled a tape loop, and then they make pig noises over the top of it.
Totally good idea.
Yeah, and so he said, again, Stuart Eltham is saying, well, that works very well. The new voices hide the kind of scratchy 78. So they seem to be taken from an old 78 record.
That's very funny. And, it's interesting how the somewhat fortunate, accident that there's a harpsichord there when they're recording on the 19th of September provokes George Martin to write a very baroque kind of 8-piece string arrangement, which they record on the 10th of October. And again, you listen on the 5-1, where there's a little bit more pig noise as far as I can hear on the 5-1. But the strings and the harpsichord, they just explode on that mix. And even on the stereo 2018 remix, it sounds fantastic. That instrumental breakdown is really well recorded.
It's very well done. It's very well done. Again, it's completely counterintuitive.
Yeah,
this is a kind of nasty, sour song. So what do you put on it? You put a string arrangement and you put a kind of tinkling little harpsichord.
It does pop up in other places. As I said, it is one of the tracks that has an Esher demo, and that demo originally appeared on Anthology 3. It kind of gets woven in and out of certain bits and pieces on the Love album. Yeah,
it's kind of hard to spot, I think, on the Love album, but it's there.
Yeah, and there is a missing verse.
There is a missing verse. Yeah, not a great verse, I have to say.
No.
Everywhere there's lots of piggies playing piggy pranks. You know what's coming when he sings piggy pranks. And
that's a reverse engineered rhyme if ever I heard one.
Yeah. And you can see them on their trotters down at the piggy banks, paying piggy thanks to thee, pig brother.
Well, Big Brother is if you didn't recognize the Orwellian,
Yeah.
like he's getting Orwellian mixed metaphors there, you know?
Yeah, he's really kind of, but I think it was probably excised, that verse, but he does reinstate it for his, he does live versions of it in the early 90s in Japan and in 92 in the Royal Albert Hall, and
yeah, he sings it.
Appearance.
Yeah, he sings it on the Live in Japan album, and he also sings the Live in Japan album with this kind of odd Dylan-y affect where he's slightly, you know, elongating vowels and coming in slightly off the beat.
Yeah, slightly late. Yeah, it is very odd. I don't know whether he's trying to suggest, you know, it's as good as a Dylan song. It's not as good as a Dylan song.
It's not. No, it's not. But it is. I think, you know, if you kind of take it as just a pop song, it is a great little kind of pop song. It's catchy. It sounds fantastic, and the instrumental version is on the White Album box set as well. If you find that the metaphor of the lyrics is a bit too heavy-handed, and it is
very 1968. It's a slight nod back, possibly to, you know, things like Whiter Shade of Pale and that those kind of classical music coming in. But yeah, I love this song.
Yeah, it is a great song. I know there's something else related to this song that we should talk about. Do we have to talk about it?
You don't like talking about it.
It's just a bit of a drag, you know.
Okay, you know. Well, do you want me to talk? We'll just read what George said about it in his book.
Okay,
He said, Piggies is a social comment. I was stuck for one line in the middle until my mother came up with the lyric, what they need is a damn good whacking, which is a nice simple way of saying they need a good hiding, which for American listeners or non-English listeners, just, you know, they need a good thump, a good beating,
a slap. Yeah.
It needed to rhyme with backing, lacking, and had absolutely nothing to do with American policemen or Californian shag nasties.
Yes. So any provocative actions that happened on the back of this song were certainly unintentional from the author's perspective. Yeah.
So this is just a reference to the Manson murders, where this song became kind of central to Charles Manson's kind of twisted worldview. And interesting, in the book about the Manson murders, George refused to give them permission to quote these lyrics.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I mean, look, we all know that George was a beautiful guy and a sensitive soul. I'm not saying that to be kind of trite. I can't imagine how something like this would have made him feel. It must have weighed heavily on him. It's certainly, you certainly kind of have to, if you're an artist, you sometimes have to detach yourself from the unintended consequences, but that's just awful.
It's an extreme. I mean, it's an extreme,
absolute extreme
example.
And if only U2 had stolen this song and stolen it back,
I have to say,
and opened Rattling Home with Piggies, that would be good, wouldn't it?
That would be hilarious. Possibly not hilarious in a good way, but
yeah, no, I'm just thinking of it now. I can't. Yeah, are there any covers of Piggies? I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Can't think. No, I can't.
Certainly no famous ones.
Obviously, this is a song that you know, Inhaler can get down to the GPO on O'Connell Street and
Inhaler, eh? They're the future of rock.
Yeah, this is Bono's son, I believe.
Bono's son's number one in the UK and Ireland. So, no, and in the UK.
In the UK too.
In the UK, they hit number one in July 2021. However did that happen? Who knows?
I don't know. I was reading about Inhaler and I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then I read it said, oh, you're Bono's son. And I thought, no, you're all right.
I read it and I went, oh, Bono's son, I am so very old. Because I remember all of Bono's kids being born.
You remember when Bono didn't have any children?
Yes. And also as an asthmatic, I don't want a band called Inhaler.
It's
like, oh, here's insulin and the wooden legs. Gives it.
Yeah.
Oh, God damn it. Anyway, enough about this. We are not even halfway through side 2 of the White Album, but we are at the end of part 1 of side 2 of the White Album, if you can follow along at home. So I think we need to take a pause there, Stephen.
I think we do.
And think about what we've done. And, but we still have another 5 songs to talk about, and we're going to tackle them on part 2, the next episode of Nothing Is Real. What do you think, folks? Out of those 4 songs, what's your favorite? 4 songs is enough for a Twitter poll, so let's just do that. Let us know in all the usual places. We're available on Twitter at BeatlesPod, the Nothing Is Real Facebook group run by Stephen. Probably by the time this goes out, past 4,000 people. There's the Instagram, which William runs for us, William Hinson. Thanks, William, which you can join us there. There's the TikTok that we never put anything on, but it's there anyway. And all of this goes through the Nothing Is Real website, nothingisrealpod.com. And also you can subscribe and like to our YouTube channel. We are a multimedia enterprise, I would have to say. But yeah, the White Album, Side 2, Part 1, done. Part 2 next week for Nothing Is Real. My name is Jason Carty.
My name's Stephen Cockcroft.
And we'll see you then. Thanks for listening.